Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 114. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today we tackle your tech questions. Get in on the action and email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Let's get to it. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome, Paul. How's it going?
Pretty good, Chris. How are you doing today?
Not doing too bad. I kind of wish we were running a just like a general podcast on technology, because I'm about to this Friday, as we're recording this, we're about to put our boat in a marina in what's called the Delta, which is the Sacramento River that goes into San Pablo Bay, which goes into San Francisco Bay. So we'll have access to basically anything we want for the winter, and it's actually cheaper to keep the boat there than it is to store it in Reno, which is why we're doing it. But so many apps I'm finding to, figure out, shipping lane schedules and tide schedules and all kinds of different boating apps, anchor alarms, all kinds of neat stuff. But, not really archaeology related. But it's going to be fun anyway, I think. So anyway, let's move on to this episode, because I think we've got enough to definitely fill out a couple segments here. So Paul and I asked on Facebook and Twitter with varying results over the last few days. Again, as we're recording this in early October 2019, we asked people for their technology questions. And I found on Facebook that people really they didn't really have questions per se. I mean, they kind of did, but they were really very general, overarching questions. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking of expecting when I asked for questions. This wasn't exactly it. I mean, I don't think we need to be your, your tech BFFs, where you could just be like, hey, having some problems with this. But I'm thinking of other shows, like entrepreneurial type shows, where people have business questions and things like that. How do I do this? And I guess I don't know what I was thinking. So, Paul, what was your success on Twitter, and what were you expecting when you actually asked the question? Like, what kind of stuff were you thinking? My expectation was basically that people would say, I'm working through problem X, Y, or Z. Does anybody have any insight? Maybe, to use us in the same way that people use Twitter a lot, at least in the parts of Twitter that I'm on, the archaeological parts, which is, people might be showing off some of their work, or they might be stuck mulling through an idea and soliciting input from their colleagues, from their Twitter friends. And I was expecting something along that lines, and instead I got retweets and likes from people that I know on Twitter, and no actual engagement in terms of questions or comments. So that's fine. I mean, there's only so much one can expect when you throw when you chum the water like that and just say, hey, anybody have anything? And that might be a little too much to expect for anybody, and also maybe a little unfair. Hey, please come up with content for me. But maybe it's a learning experience for me to think about how I can make these questions a little more pointed in the future. Next time I want to try to get a listener question session going through Twitter. Well, I'd like to make every few shows that we do a listener question show. I love answering listener questions. Yeah, I think it's such a nice way to engage with the audience and to get some answers out there. And it's not necessarily, don't think of us as people that necessarily have all the answers, but think of it as asking a question, and then we'll do the research and find out the answer. I mean, you might be thinking, well, I could do that. Yes, you could, but I'm seeing it more as a public resource where you have the question that 100 other people have, but they're not asking. And then we answer the question, and we can answer the question for 100 people versus just one person that spent hours doing research, right? So that's how I see it. So if you guys have any questions out there, even seemingly simple questions like, what's the best waterproof phone case out there? What's the best battery? What's the best way to, I don't know, something, get aerial images or something like that. What are some cool things you can do with drones? There, I said it. So we had to kind of get the plug in there. So
you know what? Just email us those questions. Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com is the general email for the show. Obviously my email, but then also at any of our pages, you can find Paul and I's contact information. I am at ArchaeoWebby, ArchEowebby on Twitter. And Paul, you are at
Lugal, Lugal on Twitter, and email. I'm Paul at lugal.com.
There you go.
I was expecting, also we don't, there are a lot of things that I know I don't have the answers to. I might have an inkling of an answer, an inkling of how to find one, but that's another thing that we can do. Just like, like I said, people throwing out questions on Twitter is that we can amplify. We can reach different audiences than you might normally have access to, because there are thousands of archaeologists working around the world, and a lot of them are using technology in very interesting ways. And if somebody hears us relay your question on, even though we don't have a good answer for you, then they can get back to us or get back to you and keep a good conversation going.
Yeah, indeed. So, all right, well, let's get to some of these responses I got from Facebook. And I basically said, hey, we're recording an episode on your listener questions. So send in your questions about technology and archaeology. And this is what I got. Now, as always, I will just default to not using people's names. I didn't even write them down in our notes here. So, I mean, the Archaeo Field Text group is where I put this on Facebook. If you want to see and engage with this, then head on over to that group and you can, comment on these and keep the conversation going. However, unless somebody sends it in and specifically says, you can mention my name on the podcast, it's just not important to us. We're not going to do that unless you're a guest of the show, which this may lead to more guests too. So, send us some information. And if it sounds like you're an expert in something, it might just contact you. So the first response that I got was actually, and I'll give this person's name because he's all over the internet, was from Tom King. And Tom King likes to comment on lots of things on Facebook. Sometimes, well, we'll just leave it right there. He's an interesting guy. I love Tom. So, but he's done a lot of work with the Tigar Foundation. I don't know if it's a foundation or whatever, but the historical aircraft people, and in the search for Amelia Earhart specifically. Mm-hmm. And he's no longer with that organization, from what I understand. Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong, assuming you listen to the show. I don't know if you do or not. But he mentioned forensic canines. And we have had people on various podcasts on the APN talking about forensic canines. The Institute for Forensic Canine Research, I think it's called, out of Northern California. They've been on a couple times. I've seen them at conferences like the Society for California Archaeology. They're always there. And I'll tell you what, the forensic canine stuff is just fascinating to me, because the noses that dogs have and the things they can be taught to smell. It's interesting. Somebody commented on this post after Tom mentioned forensic canines, that the Plumas National Forest, which is in Northern California, has had success locating historical Chinese cemeteries, among other things, in that area, just using the forensic canines. So it's a pretty cool use, and it's weird thinking of dogs as technology. But I mean, they're definitely a tool that we could use to find things. But it's kind of odd thinking of them as technology.
Yeah, I normally wouldn't think of them, but yes, you would certainly use it in the same way they would use any other like subsurface techniques, like GPR or something, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting, though. Maybe, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but historical Chinese cemeteries, is it something particular about Chinese cemeteries, or is it an area that they're looking specifically for Chinese cemeteries? Is that they're specifying, right, a national group there is interesting. I'm not sure why that's specified. That's...
There is a massive Asian component to the Old West, right? And
absolutely.
When you're looking at California, Nevada, I mean, the Chinese were a major influence over here, because they were essentially brought over to work and to just, the Chinese built the railroad. The Chinese were doing all the hard work in the mines. The Chinese were all over the place. So, I mean, the Chinese and the Japanese basically built San Francisco. I mean, you just look at the amazing sushi and Asian food we still have there today. It's I would imagine that this person made this comment because in the Plumas National Forest, there might have been some big Chinese settlements or something like that. Somebody's just trying to answer a research question, and that happened to be what they were looking for. So I don't know. He just singled out that Chinese because that was what he knew. So, but yeah, I think other cemeteries as well, though. I mean, he did say among others, and, dogs are, it's interesting when we've interviewed the people with the Institute for Canine Forensics before, They said that sometimes the dogs find stuff like on the way to where they were supposed to be searching.
Right.
Like people didn't even know something was under the ground. They just like, oh crap, there's something here. The dog's, alerting on that. So thinking back to dogs as tools, it really kind of surprises me. And maybe somebody has something like this and dogs are just cheaper. I don't know. But it's surprising me that we can't devise a tool that does the same thing as the dog's nose. I know the dog's nose have receptors in it that are fine-tuned as compared to, say, human noses, but it's also partly connected to the brain. So, it's not a very easy thing to figure out. But I wonder if we have something like that that's just as sensitive and just as calibratable to different things. Probably not, since we use them all over the place, right?
Yeah, I have not heard of any such thing. I'm sure people are working on artificial noses, but yeah, I haven't heard of anything recently.
Yeah,
a little outside of my field, so I definitely wouldn't be keeping up on the latest trends in that research. So I definitely will punt on that.
I mean, is it outside your field though, Paul? Because they're using dogs for finding archaeological material. So sounds like it's right in our wheelhouse.
Oh, no, I wasn't thinking of the dogs for it, which is still a little outside my wheelhouse. But I meant coming up with an artificial dog nose.
Artificial sniffers.
Yep.
Nice. All right. Well, somebody knows anything about that, send us an email or a tweet about it, because I'd love to know where that technology is right now. I'm sure somebody's working on something like that. We have sensors for everything. I mean, sensors all over the place. It wouldn't surprise me if we have really, really, really good sniffing sensors, smell sensors. I think they're probably just too expensive and not portable. That's probably the problem. So
no idea.
Anyway, all right. So the next question, I'm just going to read this because it seems it's going to lead me into something else too that's probably not in the realm of this podcast, but something that's been in conversation lately. So this one gentleman was talking about mapping technologies, and he said in California prehistory, the common socio-political organization is called a tribalete or a tribalete, Tribelete. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that.
I've never seen that word before. So
Right. He says, however, most maps created by anthropologists of the California prehistoric regions are based on language families. Most subsequent mapping, however, identifies these language families as tribes. Mm-hmm. Seems like a small mistake, except that the way we are trained to interpret maps is that large regions on a map show socio-political organizations. Couple that with an actual label that explicitly says tribes, and the interpretation is that these large groups of people were organized politically, which is what a tribe really is. So he goes on, which we know was not the case normally. There's a disconnect between what we know as a discipline and how we visually represent that knowledge on the maps. And I think what he's really getting at here is what he's saying is our terminology that we use on maps and in different circumstances doesn't jive with the anthropology and the way we talk about the anthropology. It's disconnected, and it kind of goes back to this growing conversation I'm seeing. We talked about this on the last CRM Mark podcast, actually a couple episodes ago, as you're hearing this for the first time, and stuff I've seen all over Facebook and probably on Twitter, is the fact that pre-1492 in the United States is typically called prehistory or prehistoric, whereas in Europe, it's just called the Middle Ages. And we certainly had writing styles. If writing is your metric, there's been writing for thousands of years here in North America. So why is that still called prehistory? It's a very Eurocentric way of thinking. That's not exactly the same thing, but it's along those same lines of terminology and where we're using it correctly.
Well, the use of the term tribe is problematic anyhow. I mean, certain natives I know say that we totally misapply the term and that they'd much rather be referred to as nations in many cases where we use the term tribe. There's this term tribalete that I've never seen before, and shame on me. And then the poster's absolutely right in that the prehistoric regions are based on language families, says C. Krober. Yeah, certainly. That's what I was taught, 30, 40 years ago. Well, not 40 yet, but 30, 35 years ago as an undergrad. We'd look at maps and it was this one-to-one correlation of language families and tribal groups. And that's not right. I think we knew it at the time intuitively. Definitely know it better now, but how do you get beyond that visual representation to something that's a little more on the ground accurate? And can you for the distant past? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just thinking of here in Reno, you see the Paiute. And the Paiute collectively, when I just say the Paiute, I mean all the Paiute, right? The Paiute Nation is one thing, but then there's different bands and tribes of Paiutes that identify as separate. I guess families is almost a better way to describe it, right? So because locally there's different ones, and when you drive out to say Pyramid Lake, which wasn't too far from here, you see the Pyramid Lake Band of Paiute Indians is how their sign even reads, right? So they call themselves a band out there, and then I know people refer to the Paiute as a tribe in general, which also isn't correct. So yeah, it's really important to pay attention to the maps that we're using, especially the historical maps and references, and even more especially when we're creating maps. Don't fall into these traps of using these so-called common terms that are actually just incorrect because we've been using them so long. We think they're correct, but they're actually not technically correct. So
those old maps of language families too. I've always wondered how much overlap there actually would be. Right.
Sure.
If you see a big orange area that's covering most of, a big chunk of North America, and it's all one language family, well, how much variability is there? Are there other speakers of other language families that are scattered throughout there? Is this, would various density maps actually be a better way of looking at it if you want to, map on a large scale like that? I honestly don't know. These are just kind of idle questions that I have when I look at these things that come up from this question. Actually, it's not even so much a question. It's more of a comment, but it's very astute.
Yeah, and you just said, when you said density map, that made me think of like I've got an old iPad sitting in the kitchen at our house, and it just has like the spinning globe, and you can put it's got weather around it, and you can change it from, say, humidity and temperature to wind speed and other things. And weather maps are always displayed with fuzzy boundaries, right? They don't have rigid, hard boundaries, and the reason for that is, you're right, the temperature doesn't go from 70 degrees to 80 degrees right here in an abrupt shift, and neither does language, and neither does culture, neither does really anything in the human sphere. And it's funny that we often present maps that way, though, and I think it's lazy, easy map making for one thing. I mean, it started out with probably publications just being easier to draw straight lines than it is to draw fuzzy lines, and now that's what everybody's been taught on, and it really starts to cloud your judgment and your brain into thinking, well, hey, I hit this mountain range and this stuff actually stops. Right. And then it becomes another thing over here, but that's not actually true.
Well, I think, the social political organizations, which is mentioned in the comment here, is actually hints at another big part of why our maps are drawn like they are, is that it comes from a very European nation state kind of idea where there are lines. There's a frontier, there's a border between, France and Germany. Now, it might not be always in the same place at the same time through history, and big wars are fought over these things. But at any snapshot in time, most of those are in fact hard lines. There are very few places that just have the border somewhere in the desert between here and over there, and there have been some like that. I mean, right. I've worked in Yemen, and they only in about the last 15 years settled where the actual border was between them and Saudi Arabia through large stretches of the empty quarter. Yeah, I think that a lot of the reason why we see the maps drawn the way they were is because it was Europeans drawing them, and that was their perspective.
Right. Hey, would you know the movie quote, "I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way"? Do you know who said that?
No.
It was, what was her name? It was Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh, yeah, of course. I do know that. Jeez.
I don't really remember like most of that movie, but I always remember that quote. And I'm going to have to make a t-shirt for the APN with a poorly drawn map showing very inaccurate things that says, "I'm not wrong, I'm just drawn that way." So yeah, I'll have to make that. All right. Well, that'll do it for this segment. Let's come back on the other side and talk about a few more mapping issues and some, obviously, GIS, because everybody has questions about GIS. Back in a second.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code Archaeotech. That's ARCHAEOTECH. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
Welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 114, and we are talking mapping and your listener questions. If you want to join in on this conversation and send us some questions, Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com, or any of our Twitter handles and other contact info over at arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. So let's get to the next question. So somebody chimed in on Facebook, and I'm just going to read this out here, and then we'll talk about it. She says, georeferencing historical maps to locate features/sites and issues with unclear scales. She says, I have a large settlement site that we were trying to locate the specific features, a Spanish fort and village boundaries. The maps were drawn in the 1700s, which is super cool. So we can only hypothesize the exact locations. However, remote sensing may solve the problem in the future. Now, I didn't include this in our notes here, Paul, but we had a little bit more dialogue around this. Mm-hmm. Basically, what she was talking about was unclear scales, because some of these historic maps, like, you just absolutely could not tell the scale. Mm-hmm. When I was working on the project down at China Lake Naval Weapons Center, there's very good maps of, like, military maps of the area, current military maps, and we had just a handful of not very good maps drawn by the early military, and then just before that by the USGS when they were there. But they didn't have very good maps prior to the 1940s when the military took over. Mm-hmm. And then when the military took over, there were no maps. Like, there were no maps drawn until the military started drawing maps of the area, which was later. So we had this, I remember trying to georeference these maps because I was using Avenza PDF maps just to put them in the background, because we had to drive all these roads and map out all these roads and then figure out, okay, which ones of these roads on this military base are actually historic, and then, do an analysis of them and figure out, all the normal stuff you do with roads. And the best way to do that was to try to georeference them. So I had some current, not only satellite maps, but also current topographic maps, and then even just like some street maps that I tried to find that were available online. Mm-hmm. And then georeferencing those with common features found on the maps, because there was no scale. The one of these maps we were using was actually hand drawn. And it was like, my God, but if you have enough georeferencing points on it, you can stretch that map to the point to where it's actually going to be mostly accurate. And I was skeptical at first because I had like 16 points on this one map where I was like, this thing's going to stretch beyond all recognition. But then we're out there driving it, and you can see, because I had an iPad enabled, GPS enabled iPad, and I had it on a window mount right in the truck there, and you could see us driving on this our little dot driving on this hand-drawn map right across the thing, which was super cool. Right. It was not super accurate in some areas, and it's probably because they moved the roads later, and they redefine those roads all the time a little bit, like move an intersection or something like that. So that was pretty cool. But I don't know, in the areas you used to work, did you ever have any issues with maps back there? Like, I know you've worked back east, or not back east, but in the Middle East and in some of those areas, a little farther east. Yeah. What are your memories of working those?
There are a couple of different issues that I've run into. I mean, definitely what you were saying about the rubber sheeting, the maps. That's something that, like any intro to whatever GIS program you're going to work on, will have an exercise or two that's like that. They'll have a historical map that is reasonably accurate but has certain distortions, and then you'll plot it and rectify it with a more modern map, so you can find certain waypoints, certain landmarks rather, that you can use to stretch that other one until everything else kind of comes along to fit. And that's what you were doing with those PDF maps. So that's one kind of problem. Another kind of problem that you get is I suspect this is more like what the poster is running into, where the maps aren't even really intended to be navigation aids like that. You're not supposed to be able to look at the map and say, oh, I've got to go 2 miles this way and a mile that way. They're more like sketch maps. They're more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're impressionistic, right? From here, you can see, these features. I know that town is over this ridge, where it doesn't really matter. It's just on the other side of the ridge from where I'm drawing this feature that I'm at. And those you fundamentally cannot rubber sheet to georeference. You can use them to help you try to find sites, but not in any mechanized way that I would know of through GIS. But yeah, so to answer your question, I didn't have very good maps initially when I started working in Yemen. There were a number of sketch maps, some of them quite good, but of like a tell and the immediate surroundings of the tell. There were some good maps that were hard to get that were done by oil and gas exploration, and those ones were really expensive and like I said, hard to get my hands on. There was a very, very good map done in 1939 by a German and Dutch explorer of the area that I worked in. But it was at a large scale, so the detail wasn't really there, and it was also kind of impressionistic. I mean, it would say, this town is in this part of the valley, and yes, it was in that part of the valley, but you wouldn't be able to necessarily measure between that town and the next town and get an exact distance. That map actually got reproduced much later, using some of those oil and gas exploration maps as a base map. So I had a much more accurate version of that from, I think, the early 70s, maybe the early 80s. But I didn't get my hands on that map until after I was mostly done with my dissertation research. So, but the time that I was doing it, let's see, I started going to Yemen in 94. I did most of my dissertation research in 99. So 97, 99, and 2001 were the times I was there, and 2004 again to do some wrap up. And in that time period, GPS really, there was none available to civilians in 94. 97, it was slow and problematic. 99, it was pretty good, but it was suffered from selective availability. Anyhow, the point of this is that in the time that I was there, I went from being reliant upon these sketch maps that weren't very good to having GPS devices that were more accurate than any maps I had.
Right.
And then so I had great points, but I didn't have anything good to plot them on. So I did a lot of rubber sheeting in GRASS, actually, was the GIS that I was using. And then by the end of it, by the time I finished writing, we had those wonderful Google Earth satellite photography and such that, I could look and check very, very definitively whether or not I'd plotted something properly on the map. I was actually really pleased that, my sketch maps were remarkably accurate, but that's probably luck more than any kind of native skill. Yeah. So I don't even know how to answer this question, because I'm not sure which problem in particular it is. If it's having navigation maps from the 1700s that suffer from having been done in the 1700s, and the tools available at the time, and they have distortions, or if the maps that the poster is using are mostly just kind of sketch maps, in which case you can't use them for the kinds of detailed work we'd like to use, as base maps.
Yeah, I think what the big thing, the commenter's probably just frustrated with the features they're trying to find in these 1700s maps, because she knows they're there, they just can't find them, and there's no obvious expression of them. But I think when she says remote sensing may solve the problem, that's I think what's really going to help them out. Not only remote sensing, but probably excavation if they're doing that as well. Because just like that rubber sheeting thing, every time you find something new, you really should head back to your GIS and pinpoint that location and tie it to a real location on the map.
Right.
And then the more of those you do, the more, theoretically, assuming the map drawer back in the 1700s wasn't being totally abstract, assuming they had some sense of scale a little bit, then as you put more points on the map, the other ones should get more and more accurate. You should be able to at least tighten in your remote sensing and your excavation strategies. So one would hope anyway, right? So anyway, let's move on and talk about the next one. So the next one is a seemingly easy question. However, we could spend and have spent, I think, entire episodes on this topic. So, open source alternative programs for the researcher on a budget.
Great question.
And I know, great question. And I'm going to actually tie that to the next question as well. And I'm going to go ahead and read that because I think we're going to be talking open source about both of these. So the next one specifically says GIS programs that aren't expensive and produce great maps, alternatives to the clunky Trimble in the field that don't require excessive post-processing, which sometimes just moves sites one county over where they clearly aren't. And aren't is in angry capital letters. So I think this person has really experienced this before.
It sounds like it.
Right. And then absolutely useful for field work that don't kill your phone battery. So I think I'm lumping these together because a lot of the stuff that I think we're going to talk about in both cases are, in fact, open source alternative programs, because everybody knows the common ones, Esri and like she even said, Trimble and stuff like that. So, So yeah, let's talk open source. So what first comes to your mind when you think open source alternative programs, Paul?
Top of the list when we think of archaeology feeds right into the previous question. It's GIS and QGIS in particular.
Yep.
Actually, I've got much more experience with GRASS, which is really old school in its approach, and I don't think I would recommend it to anybody starting out. But also QGIS works beautifully and is much more intuitive, much more sensible, much more like a modern program.
Yeah, and I'm not really a GIS person. I know enough to be dangerous, right? And I actually took a GIS course in grad school just to learn some of the fine-tuned stuff that I'd never had formalized training in. And I use QGIS because I run a small business, right? I mean, I don't need GIS all the time, so I'm not going to pay for an Esri license. And to be honest, I don't know why anyone ever would. I mean, what are the benefits of using the Esri program, especially from an archaeological context? I mean, I think the Esri database feature in the, what am I trying to think of? Like the ArcPat, not, what is it called? ArcMap or something like that.
No.
Not ArcGIS.
I can't remember all the names of their products.
I know. They've got so many different modules that all work together. And that might be one of the features of the program, actually, where you have these independent things and maybe just data storage is more reliable. I don't really know. But from just a pure functional standpoint, like actually just plotting coordinates, making maps, moving things around, drawing features, all the analysis tools that you need, it's all there in QGIS. And QGIS is free. And most of the keystrokes and everything look similar to Esri products. So honestly, I don't know why people are so beholden to Esri and the amazing prices that they charge for that program when you've got a free one that works just as well. So I'd like to hear from some GIS experts on what the major differences are and why you would actually choose Esri over QGIS.
I'm going to throw a couple ideas out, and this is not from experience. This is from experience with other classes of software, where I've got a comparison between an open source program and payware. And I'm very much a proponent of open source software. I'm very comfortable using most of the open source programs I've used. And I personally don't find great differences, but where I do find the differences that might be meaningful to other people, again, not usually to me, but is support. And that usually when you buy a software license, it comes with a support contract too. So that is definitely a real issue for a lot of people. And then the other one is integration with other software and hardware products. With open source, it's typically dependent upon the people who are writing the open source software, or if it's got a kind of modular plugin design, people who can write plugins for that open source software to integrate it with X, Y, or Z other program or other hardware. With closed source software, if you have something that's a big program like an Esri program, they'll build partnerships with hardware and software, other programmers and other designers. And so then it gets, it becomes a business relationship, and there's oftentimes, smoother integration than between these different things. Not always. And I think it's often hyped more than it actually is versus open source alternatives. But being able to know that somebody else has a business case behind supporting the product that you're paying for is comforting to a lot of people, and especially if it does work, better. And then the last one that I could think of is now escaping me. I had a third point. Why don't you say something? I'll remember it in a moment. It was a minor one, obviously, by comparison.
Well, just talking about some of the, I mentioned databases with Esri, and one piece of software that comes to mind that's specifically a database software for archaeology, built by archaeologists for archaeology, is Interis Registries. And we've had one of the founders on there before on here, and I talk to every time I go to a conference, he's there and I see him. So, but Interis Registries is a great piece of software, and it's actually pretty. I don't want to say complicated, but I want to say complicated in a good way, right? It's complicated in a way that gives you a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of different modules and a lot of ways you can use it. And it really is designed for people working on a large scale excavation that can pull in a ton of artifact data and be able to, map these, I don't want to say map, it's not a mapping program necessarily, but you can bring in GIS data into it, but it's more of a program to look at your levels of excavation and what was found in there and catalog these, from discovery to the museum or the archives. So great piece of software, and we'll include links for all this stuff in our show notes, all the things we're going to talk about too. So check those out.
Yeah. I would, since we're talking about databases, the obvious ones, database engines are MySQL and PostgreSQL. And there's, if you're looking for a relational database engine, I don't think there's any reason to look beyond those two for the purposes of what we as archaeologists need.
So hold on, let's take a step back for a second.
Well,
because
I was just going to say, I was going to put in all the caveats now.
Well, I'm not really too much. I mean, I'm a database guy from the standpoint of I understand basically how they work and stuff, but I'm not super into it. So with people listening to this show, what do you mean by database engine? And when I see things like MySQL, I have a fundamental understanding of what those are, but not exactly how they're used. So when you say database engine, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is the software that actually stores the data and defines the parameters of how the data themselves are encoded and interrelate to each other. So both these are fairly old school kind of relational database models, which is that you have each table in your database. You can think of like a spreadsheet, right? And each column each column in the spreadsheet is one particular measurement. Length, width, height, color, location, name, all the way on down. And each row is an individual object of some kind, right? Okay. Site 1, Site 2, Site 3, Sherd 1, Sherd 2, Sherd 3, however you want to do it. And then the tables, you might have a table of objects that you found, and you might have a table of sites. And then each object in that table relates to one particular site because it was found on a particular site. Right. And so the engine is a way of enforcing the integrity behind all this, but also handles all the more mundane kind of computer tasks of, how it stores those data. Right. And these two programs are very much stripped down, and there's no real interface. There's textual interfaces, graphical interfaces, web-based interfaces and whatnot, but it's not like a FileMaker, which is another very big, very popular database engine that kind of blurs the line between that data structure and storage and data display and input. Right. So there are big advantages to using something like FileMaker, where those lines are blurred because you can get up and running quickly. Sure. If you don't need that kind of front end, I think that those are the back. Now, the caveat that I was going to say, though, is that in most cases, and this is going to be do as I say, not as I do, I think that archaeologists probably shouldn't be going down to this level. They should be trying to use other people's products, other archaeologists or commercial products or open source products, whatever it is, and not try to reinvent the wheel every time out like we have a tendency to do by going straight down to, okay, I'm going to build this on MySQL, and now, what's my front end going to be, and is my table structure going to be, and what are all the fields in this, and how are they going to interrelate, and on down the rabbit hole, because most of us aren't nearly as good at it as we'd like to be. It'd be better if we were, but I think that this is kind of a safety in numbers thing, that if somebody else has done it and it's working for them, see if you can take what they're doing and use it straight out of the box. See if you can use it with some minor modification for what you have to do. But, and again, this is do as I say, not as I do, because this is what I do all the time as I try to reinvent the wheel. And I've had very little success with it. So there you go.
So are you down with OPP means? Is other people's products? Are you down with other people's products? Is that what that meant?
Maybe.
No?
I think I've got a few more years on you, and I think I remember it slightly different.
Nice. Well, let's finish out this conversation here then, because one of the other facets of the last question was alternatives to the clunky Trimble in the field that don't require excessive post-processing. Now, that's two actually different questions, because you've got GPS modules that will read information in the field, right? But then you've got post-processing. And what do you mean by excessive post-processing? It says, which sometimes just moves sites one county over where they clearly aren't. I think that's incorrect post-processing if I'm thinking about it right, because if you get the right GPSs that are doing the right things in the field, then you shouldn't have to do much to your data, right? We had on Matt Alexander from Anatome Geomobile Solutions, whose ad you have likely already heard on this podcast or will hear soon, because he sent me an Arrow 100 to play around with, because I've heard about them before. You know, it's actually bigger than I thought it was, but it's definitely way smaller than a Trimble. But it's got a nice little case on it, and if you wanted to make it, super accurate, there's a little backpack antenna that you can have that can just mount into any backpack, really. You got the little antenna there, but they go all the way up to the super fancy ones that are, as much as, if not way less than a Trimble, depending on the options, because they're so configurable. All these things are, including Trimbles. I mean, you can get a Trimble GPS that's $10,000 or $20,000. I mean, it just doesn't matter. It just depends on your options. But anyway, the point is, these things are pretty cool, and they require very little post-processing, right? I think if you're doing post-processing right now, like extensive post-processing, it's because you're using a super old Trimble that just doesn't have those capabilities, which is not uncommon in the field of archaeology to be using something that's 10 years old that no one else is using. So, because maybe you picked one up on eBay for $1,000 versus $6,000 or something like that. So I think it's really just about updating your gear and trying one of those small ones. Now, of course, I said this is a multi-part question because if you have one of those devices, you can't just use it. You have to Bluetooth that or hard link it to a tablet or a smartphone or something like that. And then you need the right app to be able to read that. For example, WildNote, which I'll talk about in a second. WildNote's not a mapping software, but we do have the ability to drop a point. And so since we're not mapping software and we haven't really gone down the road of mapping, I used to say, because I thought this was true, that if you Bluetooth one of those Bluetoothable GPS devices to your phone or tablet, that the coordinates within your tablet will now just read that Bluetooth device. It will overtake them. And that might used to be true, but I think it's gotten too complicated lately because it's not actually true anymore. And I've proven that over and over again with that Arrow 100, trying to find programs where I can actually switch to that antenna. Because even if it is reading the coordinates off that antenna, it's not giving me any other data, right? It's not giving me any of the position data associated with that point. It's literally just showing me the coordinates. And I have no way to verify that it's actually the coordinates from that Bluetooth antenna. So if you're using something, unfortunately, Esri's program, not Survey123, what's the other one? Well, I'll come up with it, put it in the show notes. Anyway, the one that everybody uses with Survey123, God, it's right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, that one is actually a pretty good app for recording information, but you need an Esri license to be able to use it, right? And there's a couple others out there that you can actually download that will, like Gaia, I think is one of them, where you can switch the antenna to the Bluetooth external antenna. So if you can't switch the antenna, you can't guarantee that you're actually using the coordinates of your $2,000 external antenna. So, just keep that in mind. All right. So some of the other apps we'll just go through relatively quickly here. I mean, obviously, she says apps that are useful for field work, but that don't kill your phone battery. Again, that comes down to, well, what are the apps you're using and what are you trying to do, right? If it is a mapping application, one thing you can do to not kill your phone battery is close the application every time you're done using it. They open super fast. So you can also make sure it's not mapping in the background unless you need it to map in the background. And if you need it to map in the background, well, your two solutions to that are A, get a better phone. Obviously, that's too expensive sometimes for people, and you can't go out and spend $1,200 on a new phone. Or B, buy external batteries, right? I mean, there's tons of them out there, and they're actually getting super, super cheap for really, really good external batteries. And they're not that heavy. They're easy to charge up. And it's really, I don't think with just even from a safety standpoint, if you don't plan on using your phone for the company work that you're doing, but you have a phone, you should probably have an external battery out there. What if you're the only person left and everybody gets picked off by coyotes and you can't get back to the truck, right? You need a phone to be able to call for help once you get to service. So just have an external phone battery. I don't know why everybody doesn't have one of those out in the field. It should be part of your safety equipment, just like water, a vest, and a first aid kit, and an external phone battery. So anyway, some apps that are good. Obviously, I work for WildNote, but I don't feel biased in saying that because I've also worked for Codify, and I went down the road with app development on my own company, and I've used a bunch of different things. And so far, for my money, for my small business that I run, WildNote is the best value for the money, and it's modifiable, and you can do anything you want to it. So and collect any kind of data, and it's easy on the battery. Now, we have had some battery issues before with WildNote, but that's usually tied to an older Android device or an older iOS device that actually doesn't have very good battery management with their applications. So it requires you to upgrade your software. Any app will do that. So upgrade your software internally if you can. And if you can't, and you're rocking an iPhone 5S, it might be time to invest in something slightly newer. So yeah, that's my soapbox. You got anything else along these lines, Paul?
No, batteries and the newness of the equipment and how you're actually running your software. One other thing might be our laptops here at school. I recommend that everybody restarts them like once a week. Mm-hmm. Say, there's sometime, on the weekend, just give it a quick restart, and it keeps them running better. There are always a few telltale signs when they haven't been restarted in months, and sometimes it is, I've had people come down asking why they can't get on the network, and it turns out they haven't rebooted their computer in 250 days. That cures just about everything. So that's always worth a try, is just, if you seem like your battery is dying too quickly on your handheld device, just give it a reboot. See if that clears anything up.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm not actually sure how Android works on that respect, but on iOS, restarting your device it will clear out a lot of memory issues. It will do stuff, and it's always a good idea if you're having problems to just restart, like Paul said. But also keep in mind, if you have an app that happens to be running in the background, that app's not going to stop running in the background when you restart your device, because
it'll start right back up.
It'll start right back up. Yeah, so you have to, if you've got one of the newer iPhones, the 10 or up, you have to just hold up on that little tab on the bottom of the screen, and then it shows you all your apps, and you just got to flip them out of the way. And if you've got an older device, you've got to hold down on the one app and then just flip all those out of the way, or there's a little X there. So just keep that in mind. You might not know which app is actually operating in the background. So just close them all if you can, and then start reopening them. And if you get to a point where, and then maybe pay attention to it as well. Like I noticed as we spoke last time, that new Decibel app was starting to take my watch battery down pretty quickly. And now that I'm not running it in the foreground on a watch face, it's not doing it anymore. So it was clearly the Decibel app that was listening all the time and listening for, audio events that was taking my battery down. So I was able to isolate it there. But for your phone, best thing to do is just kill all the apps and then start them up one by one, but pay attention to your battery drain and pay attention to the heat on your phone too. If your phone feels like it's getting hot, that usually means it's something's overtaxing the processor and it's doing it in a bad way. So yeah, well, I don't think I have anything else. How about you, Paul? We got on this one?
I think this has been a plenty long session. We managed to squeeze a lot out of these handful of questions.
Absolutely. So send in your questions. We'll be your tech therapists, and send in your questions. And again, they might be simple questions. You might think they're simple questions. You could also do the research and find that out. But even if you want to do the research, send us the question, because we know it's something people are thinking about, and we can hit our audience of 5,000 to 7,000 people per month, and they can find the answer to that as well. So you can help others by asking your question and helping get it on the podcast. So, all right. Well, we will be back in just a second with our App of the Day segment.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets. Always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
Get 15% off a set of BrakeMess Select, Select Pro, or Import Direct brake pads and 2 rotors now at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
All right, welcome back to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 114, and this is the App of the Day segment. And I'm going to let Paul go first because he's doing something we've never done on the App of the Day segment before, which is actually using the app during the segment, and you're going to hear about that here in a second. Go ahead.
Right. So you can probably tell already that my voice sounds a little bit differently than it did in the rest of this episode. And the reason is that right now I'm using my iPhone as a microphone. The program I'm using is called Microphone Live. It's by Von Bruno. It's iOS only. I found this app and downloaded it last episode, just before last episode, because as we were getting ready to record, I realized I'd misplaced my regular microphone. I'd left it in the country and wasn't anywhere near it. So, if I couldn't find a headset, I was going to use this microphone app instead. I did find a headset, and so I recorded the last episode with that headset, but this time I decided that I'd give this a whack. And it certainly seems serviceable. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. You're listening to the results of it. There's not a whole lot that can be done with it. It's iOS only, so you plug it in on your Mac. You open up the MIDI utility for some reason, and then in there you can enable your iPhone. I suppose it probably also works with iPads, but you can enable your iPhone as an external audio device. Then you go into the system preferences, make sure that it's actually using the iPhone as the microphone and not the built-in microphone, and then everything else is pretty much the same. You launch the app, and it has one button in the middle to start using it as a microphone, and you can press it again to stop. And it has a waveform, and you can scroll up or down to increase the input volume, the gain on it, or decrease it. And that's basically it. And, it looks like in a pinch it works.
So you're just plugged into the headphone jack?
I am plugged into Lightning to USB.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And
because you don't have a headphone jack.
Because I don't have a headphone jack.
Right.
If I had a headphone jack, I could have used, and I suppose I probably could have used just a regular pair of Lightning headphones, or headphones with the TRRS connector. And use it like you would a phone through the headphones. But I didn't think of that. And I don't know why I didn't think of that. I decided to go a little more complicated. But, so here I've got this thing as an external microphone. Now, you can use your phone for recording. That's nothing new. People have been doing that forever. Sure. It's a perfect little field recorder. But I hadn't seen using it as an external microphone on anything.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And it's an interesting thought for people who, might be speaking on a Skype call or something like that. And maybe the microphone on the computer just doesn't sound very good.
Right.
But you have a phone with you at all times. So you may as well try that and see if it works better. It might be able to get closer to your mouth. Also, that might work better if you're in like a noisy environment and you want to bring the phone up to your mouth and use that microphone versus, sitting 2 feet back away from the one on your computer.
Yeah, certainly. I did notice when I was testing this just before we started recording, I did a few little recordings directly on my computer just to see what it sounded like differently versus my regular microphone. And I didn't realize, but the mini fridge in the room that I'm at had turned on, and I couldn't hear it at all on my nice condenser microphone that I normally record with. But I certainly did hear it with my iPhone. It was a persistent buzz in the background, whereas the condenser microphone just ignored it entirely.
Right. Nice. All right. Well, anything else to say about that microphone app? I mean, I think it sounds pretty decent compared to just the recording on the computer. Obviously, it's not as good as your regular microphone that you use, but that's to be expected. But man, in a pinch, this doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah. The one last thing I forgot to mention is that it's free. It's got banner ads on it, but they're not particularly intrusive. And I haven't seen anything like happened with that game where I was a little bothered by the ads.
Nice. All right. Well, transitioning from microphones to magazines. So I was just kind of looking around for some archaeology news and things like that, and just seeing what was in the App Store because for iOS anyway, which is what I use. And I saw the Archaeology magazine app, and I don't remember if I've seen that before, so I don't know how long it's been out, but it's 100% garbage. I'll tell you that right now. But the app was just not put together very well. Definitely requires an internet connection to obviously access everything. But it looks like you can download magazines back for $4.99 per issue, which I don't know how that compares to the newsstand price of the magazine. My guess is it's probably exactly the same. And you can go all the way back to January, February issue for 2011 as far as downloading it goes. Now they have listed all the way back to what is this, 2004? I think it is. Let me take a look here. I think it's 2000. Oh, well, it's even farther than that. So 1986. I'm seeing here. Yeah. Now here's the thing. I think they might be scanning in issues going back. Oh, it's actually loading more. It wasn't loading before, which is also a problem this is having. I'm seeing 1981 here. So you can preview all the way back to 1981. You can preview these issues, but you can't download them and you can't purchase them. And I think it's because they don't exist yet, right? I think they're just starting with the covers and the contents and the few pages, and then seeing, and then getting the rest in as they go along. So. Anyway, that's pretty cool. The things I don't really like about this, well, let me go back to some more things that I do like. So I looked at the preview of the current issue, and I haven't bought one yet, but I looked at the preview of the current issue, and you basically using it just like you would normally. You just don't have all the pages. It just gives you like the first 6 or 7 pages, which is nice because you can actually see the table of contents, and they've got some little tools to jump straight to the table of contents and search within the magazine, things like that. And you could just see, like, I don't want to subscribe to this maybe, but maybe this issue has some things that I want in it, and I don't know who sells Archaeology magazine in my town, right? But I heard of an article in there, and I want to check it out. And $4.99 is not that bad to pay for a magazine. You're not contributing to a landfill. You're not, doing anything else. So downloading it for $4.99 is actually a pretty good deal, and seeing it there. I just don't like the way that. This is such an old way of thinking too. Like when the internet and I guess capabilities like this really started to come online, magazines were still like page flip style magazines, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, we created an online ebook for one of the SAA sessions about 6-7 years ago, and it was in that format, right? Like where you go there and you download it and you pay. I think you pay like 99 cents for it or something. No, maybe it was free. I think it was free. Anyway, you flip pages, and I'm like, that is so antiquated. I don't need to flip pages, right? I just need to see the content and maybe see it in a little more dynamic way. And so I don't like the interface of the app where you have to flip pages and you can zoom into the page, and it's just a little clunky doing that. And also, if you click on the menu icon in the upper left-hand corner, there's a news section. I've literally never got anything to show up in the news section. It just spins and spins and spins, and actually locks the app up. I'm doing it right now, and you got to kill the app and let it come back. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's the first time I've ever used the news, and it just needs to load the entire interface from the internet. But I've got pretty fast Wi-Fi where I'm at right here, so it should have loaded by now, and it's been loading since I've been talking. So. Anyway, I would say the app is useful in the sense that they don't sell Archaeology magazine everywhere. They often do have some halfway decent articles, and if you're hungry for some archaeology news and you want to see some stuff out of that, you don't have to subscribe to it. You can just download a single episode. From what I can tell, it's going to live within that application, which may be a bad thing because I don't know how long they're going to support it, and it's already trash. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. You get your archaeology news at Archaeology magazine. You don't have to subscribe, but you're going to pay for it in quality. Now, they do have an iPad app, and I haven't looked at it on my iPad yet, and I have a feeling that the iPad is going to be a way better interface, just because you won't have to do as much pinching and zooming, because the pages just inherently be bigger, right? So who knows? So One interesting thing is, and I don't know the answer to this question, but on Apple specifically, within the Apple News, if you subscribe to News Plus, there's actually magazines in there. And I don't know if Archaeology Magazine's included with that, but just to meet the Apple standards, they would have to up their game on the quality of that presentation. So maybe that's where they're spending all their resources, and maybe they won't be supporting the app anymore because of that. I don't know. I know it's available for Android, and I don't know what equivalent services Android has for, or Google, I should say, for magazines. So I'm just not aware of that. But anyway, that's pretty much all I've got today. Pretty short app of the day segment. Anything else to add for this episode, Paul?
No, I'm just, I'm curious, and I'm going to have to research this. I didn't know about this app, but I do know, because I am involved in the, in our local chapter of the AIA here.
Sure.
That the AIA National has been updating their computer systems. And so I just got emails today about a new membership website that they have, and with my new password to get into it. And so I wonder if this app, this Archaeology Magazine app, has anything to do with, an overall directive that they're doing internally at National to modernize their systems.
Well, I always do appreciate the, people that bother to put together an app. It's just, I feel like they used probably one of those template app builder kind of things, and it didn't quite work out for them, because, for example, just turning it on my iPhone 10 here, which has, albeit a slightly different screen resolution than most of the other iPhones, it's a little narrower and a little taller. And the word archaeology bleeds off the left and right side of the screen. It's not even, it didn't even size, like scale, to fit the screen. Like the minute I saw that, I knew I was in trouble. So yeah, anyway, I like the thought behind it anyway, as I mentioned. So, and it does have a subscribe button here too. I haven't pushed that yet to see how much it is and what that costs, but it'll subscribe. Oh, $14.99 for an annual subscription, which is really good. So if you want to get all the issues, you can do that for $14.99. It says you can get a monthly subscription for $9.99, which I'm not really sure. I guess if you wanted to quickly download all the all the back issues, maybe that's what that would be for. Huh. Yeah, I'm not really sure. So sounds pretty expensive. I think I'd be more likely to download individual issues and go from there. So, all right. Well, thanks, Paul, and thanks everybody for listening. And again, send in your questions for our next listener question episode. They can be about anything. Let us read your questions and help anyone else that might be having a similar problem. And hey, maybe you've got a problem that you had and you figure out a solution to, a clever solution, and you want to let us know about it. We'll talk about that too, because that's real similar, and take some work off of us too. But it's nice to crowdsource these ideas and get them out on the podcast. So
definitely.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Paul, and thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Archaeotech podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.arcpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at arcpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off-Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
The Labor Day weekend sale is on at Tanger Outlets. Score up to 70% off at top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, J. Crew Factory, Gap Outlet, and so many more. Refresh your wardrobe with the latest arrivals for less from all your favorite brands this Labor Day weekend. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.